Hello and welcome back to LAN 6340, class number 3. Today's session is all about materials. We're going to be going through all of the little settings in the materials editor, and we're going to be talking about how you apply these to your objects and what they all do. So there's bump maps and transparency and reflections and all that sort of carry on. It's going to be a very good reference for you in the future as well, so you'll be able to look up exactly how to make that perfect glass or that perfect rock or anything like that. Alright, let's get into it. Alright, so we're just going to start a new project using the default atmosphere, nice and fast. We'll probably change the light settings a couple times through this tutorial. And we're going to create a sphere. Okay, just pop that right there, it's fine. Alright. And open up its material settings. So if we select our sphere, we can right click on here and go edit material. Alright. So we've got lots of things to talk about. First thing I'm going to talk about actually is just sort of ways of previewing your changes. So here you'll see we've got a very similar sort of material as we see in the top right. The first thing I want to do, at the moment it's set to object parametric, which means that it will map it to the object, and if we scale our object, we'll scale everything with it. So I'll show you what I mean. So if we load in this, so I'll just change it back to object parametric. Okay, so it doesn't matter if my object's that big, or if I go and scale it right down to, let's say, 1 meter squared, we'll see that our texture scales down with it as well. Okay, and we don't really want that at this stage, or maybe we do. Whereas if this was on object standard, you'll see that the texture actually has a set size, if you like. So if I go and make that smaller, okay, you can see now the texture is still the same size, just the object got smaller. So it really does depend on what you're trying to achieve. Okay, so it's object standard versus object parametric. We can also see things, so a lot of the time we want object standard. There's other ways of wrapping this around. So object cylindrical is actually wrapping our texture around it. So you can see it in this color production much better. So it's as if it's wrapping it around, kind of like applying a sticker to a bottle. And we also have object spherical. So in here what we're doing is it's kind of like the same way that we wrap a map around a globe, or we do the opposite really. We kind of unwrap the globe and then turn it into a map. And so if this was our grid system, which it very much is for mapping, when we unwrap it, it would be a perfect grid. Alright, so we're going to use object standard, and you'll notice, see up in the top left it says 10 meters. Okay, so this is why if we go to object parametric, it makes no sense, because if we make the object bigger or smaller, it's always going to look the same. Okay, it's always going to have the texture mapping onto it exactly in the same fashion. So I'm going to change this to object standard. Now you'll notice that you can see what this texture would look like if it was a 1 meter block, okay, or a 10 meter block, okay, or even a 1,000 kilometer block, okay, right down to 1 millimeter, okay. It looks like it doesn't change, but you can remember these black and white squares are much larger. Okay, so it's on a 1 meter. Let's go back to 10 meters. Okay, I think our sphere is yeah, it is 6 meters round. Okay, so that'd fit in there. Alright, now we've also got this little button down here. If we click that, we can see that we've got a whole bunch of preview options. Okay, so at the moment it's being mapped to a cube, but we can change it to a sphere, a cloud, like as if you're looking up at an infinite plane, a terrain, cylinder, cone, like a flat plane, okay, and if we're just looking straight onto the surface. So this would be like a ground plane, XY plane. Okay, let's just change this to sphere. Is there anything else? Alright, and if we hit this little plus down here, we should get a bigger version of it. Okay, so you can change the size of this just by grabbing the corner. Sometimes it's very unresponsive. Come on. There we go. Okay, so you can change the size of that, hit render, and all update. So it's just a nice way of having a larger version of this preview window. Sometimes, especially when you're doing little changes to the surface, this is too small. Of course, you could just render this window. Yeah, let's just close that one for now, though. All right. Now we've also got a name of our texture, so we're going to create a new texture. So if we go down here, let's see we've got new, load, and save. So we're going to click new. This gives us a completely default grey material, and we can give this a name here. So we're going to call it I don't know, demo 1. We've got a scaling factor, which in this case is going to be very boring. So we're going to leave that at 1. But if it was our checkerboard, we can actually double click on this, we can go back to that. You can see it's scaling it by 0.1, so if I change that to 1, okay, or 0.01, it's changing the overall scale of it. Yeah, so I'm just going to go new again. There we go. Alright. Is there anything I don't really want to talk about anything else? Oh, sorry, yeah, I should really talk about this world standard object standard. So it is exactly the same as what we saw. So if we just go back to this, if we change this to world standard, right, we shouldn't see any difference in here. However, we will see something here. Okay, so now it's just standard mapping, but if I move my object, you watch what happens. See the texture staying in the same place in the world? Okay, so as it moves away, okay, the texture is actually staying where it is. So obviously it's, this is great if you've got like a whole bunch of objects. If I drag a copy of this, okay, the textures will always line up perfectly. Okay, so you can actually see that this texture is just infinitely large. Okay, and it just keeps mapping over it all. Alright, I'm just going to briefly talk about where your textures live. So normally I'd grab them from here. It's got standard materials, and we'd see all our plant materials. It's all kind of broken down. However, there is a lovely little material browser in here. Okay, and we can see this, and it's quite nice because we can increase the resolution. We can make this a little bit bigger. We can change what we saw before, and we can edit them. Okay, so the material browser is quite nice, especially if you've got a second screen. You can pop that onto the second screen. It just makes it very easy to sort of drag and drop textures. Alright, so if we're going to change this back to object standard. Okay, you can see now it's being mapped to our object. So these two objects look the same. Alright, we'll talk about a whole bunch of this stuff later. So let's go and do a new default texture, and the first choice we get is whether or not we want a mapped picture or procedural colors. So a mapped picture, we can go and load an image and place it onto our object. Okay, so here it is. We're going to change this to object standard, so it gets mapped directly onto our object. And we can do a few things. We can scale it, so we can make this whole thing a lot smaller. So let's make that 0.4.4. Now you'll see it's actually repeating over and over and over. So you notice it's got a whole bunch here. It's got automatic mapping, so this is how it's going to attach it to the surface. UV mapping, it should try and stretch it over. Well, remember when we saw the grid and we saw how it was making it smaller? So there's a kind of like as if there was a grid being mapped to our surfaces. Flat, so this will go and cast it just straight over our entire object. In fact, if I change this to look like a cube, it should be able to see this. Let's just change this back to 1 by 1. Okay, and I'm actually going to change this to object parametric, and we should see it. See how it's now it's actually going to stretch it over our object perfectly. Doesn't look very impressive in here, and this preview doesn't seem to update very well either, does it? Okay, so this is really good when we've got an aerial photo and we wanted to drape it over a terrain. Okay, it would drape directly over the terrain. Alright. Let's just go back to this cube. Faces, so that's going to put it on each face. Blop, 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 blop. Cylindrical. Again, it's kind of what I was saying with the label of a bottle. It's going to get wrapped around it. And we've got spherical, so it's going to just stretch it around it like a sphere. And this one's actually like if this was a torus, you know, one of these guys. Okay. All right. Now we've also got how it repeats. So if we wanted to say, okay, well, I want it on, let's say automatic UV, but I don't want it to. I just want it once in the X and once in the Y. And I'm just going to bring this right down and scale. So now you can see it's applying the image once, in this case, to each face. And on our sphere, we don't have lots of faces. Okay, we do flat vertical, faces, cylindrical, etc., etc. Okay. Now there's actually, if we change this to automatic, we should. They introduced this a couple versions ago. We should be able to actually crash the program with it. You should be able to actually project that onto the object, and it's meant to be interactive. We'll just pause that for a second. And we're back. So let's just get back into this texture. Oops. This one here. Okay, so that's what, yeah, that's supposed to work, but every time I hit it, it crashes. I'm not going to press that button again. So yeah, so that's using the mapped picture. Now the next one I want to talk about is procedural colors. So if you remember, let's just get rid of this sphere here and we'll just look back down again. Our procedural textures, if we go edit function, uses our little node view here, okay, our function editor, and we can load in all sorts of stuff. So we can create a fractal, okay, and we can choose from any of the fractals. You could even choose the Rocky Mountain fractal if you wanted to, although it's not going to create a surface, it will create sort of a black and white image. But we can choose any of these things, so we could say, well, let's use a simple fractal. Remember, it's got these different noises in here, so we could say, okay, well, how about an onion? Okay, and we can connect that up to the color. Okay, and you can see here we're getting some colors produced. We can plug in a little map to this. Okay, so what that's doing is it's going, right, okay, wherever you get, let's just go edit this map. Black, it's going to be green, and when it's white, it's going to be white. And we can change this, so we can come in here and say, well, actually, let's make this color red. Oops. Okay. And then it's going to go blue. Okay, then it's going to go green. Ooh, this is going to be hideous. And then it's going to go, I don't know, yellow. Okay, so we're going through all of these different colors. If you don't want a color, you just select it. Oh, you can't delete that one. Okay, can't delete the end one. Let's just go purple. So if we decide to actually don't really like this one here, you can either move it or delete it. There we go. Alright, and so now you can see the hideous mess that we're making over there. Okay, and so if we go and change that to object standard, we should get a little bit more control over it. There we go. That's what it's going to look like over a 10-meter circle, so we can scale this. Okay, and we get some very bizarre things happening. I'm not quite sure. Oh, I know why. Because this is an onion skin, what's happening when it's a sphere, and it's kind of radiating out. So we'd have to, if we change this so that maybe it wasn't totally spherical, we should actually see some sort of color change happening now. Alright, kind of interesting, isn't it? I suppose you can make a log texture doing that. In fact, if you went and had a look at this on a cylinder, yep, apart from it being in the wrong direction, you can see we could make a good wood texture. Alright, I'm just going to reset this whole thing again. So we can use our function editor to do whatever we like. This is what it should usually show up as. I don't know why it was blank before. I usually delete them anyway. Okay, there's all sorts of stuff in there. So if we just wanted to make a noisy sort of surface, so especially good for rocks, we can have a little play around in here and kind of get a bit more gain happening. Okay, you can play around with this texture. So yeah, got a little bit of color variations. Let's just map these colors to something that looks a little bit more like rocks. And this time what I'm going to do is we're going to load in a color map rather than making our own. Okay, so if we just double click on this color map, you'll actually see it's got rocks and grasses. So it's kind of like a nice sort of brown rock material. And okay. Alright, so if I just go and expand this, it's going to, oops, that's not what I wanted. That button there. You can kind of see that we've kind of got this dirty sort of coloured surface. And because it's procedural, we're never going to see a pixel. Okay, if this was a mapped image, if we get too close to that mapped image, we're going to start seeing pixels and it's going to get all blurry and yucky. Or if you move too far away, it's not going to repeat properly. So procedural textures are beautiful. Right, let's just go new again. Alpha production is just the transparency. So again, I'll just load a function this time. Let's say we wanted it to kind of have this noisy, blocky transparency to it. We can scale this down. 0.1 by 0.1. Okay, so now I've kind of got this very odd material where it's got square, sort of semi-transparent, opaque, completely transparent surfaces to it. Alright, and again we're going to go new. The overall color will kind of override whatever our color settings are. So for example, if I just click on here again, double click on that, so here's our overall color. So if I decide really like this, but actually I kind of want it to be in the blues, I can change it to blues, and it's kind of as if it's multiplying all the colors by blue, and so it's kind of like an override if you like. It's really a much better idea to be tweaking it in the color map itself, but sometimes it's easier just to do that one. Alright, if you're wondering what this is, our function. So if we went back to this guy, if we wanted to either be transparent or solid, we could adjust this filter. I can't remember if we've talked about filters really. I think we did a little bit with the atmospheres. Okay, so it's saying is that anything from -1 to 0 is going to be -1, and then anything above that is going to be 1. So I should end up with, it's either transparent completely or completely solid. Okay. Again, I could have done that within the function itself, but sometimes it's easy just to kind of override it. Alright, reset that. Okay, so there's lots of controls, and I'll let you have a play around with it. Play around with some of these fractals. But for now, we're just going to go with straight grey colour, and moving on to bumps. Now, there's two types of bumps. Our bump map, which is sort of a traditional rendering technique of, it's basically putting shadows and highlights onto the surface so that it appears as if the surface is rough. It's not actually going to change any of the polygons, if you like, that make up your surface.
Again, we can load a function into here, so let's just load in good old grainy fractal.
Okay, and it looks like we have a rough surface. However, you'll notice that if we just expand this, is that rendering? Yep. You actually see that the edge is completely smooth. Okay, because it's not actually altering the geometry. Displacement mapping, on the other hand, does alter the geometry, and in doing so it looks spectacular. So let's just, I'm going to make this depth 5 so it just overdoes it. However, our rendering time will be drastically affected, so be very careful with what you apply displaced surfaces with. It is really awesome, however it does add a lot of geometry to our model. In fact, you should see this 121 polygons. If I hit OK, it should get blown out of proportion. Sometimes it doesn't recalculate until I actually hit render. Okay, there you go, 13,000 polygons. Okay, so it added a lot of geometry. And you can see it's pretty crude as well. And that's got to do with this quality boost here. Okay, if we increase the quality boost, it's going to increase the complexity, and our poly count will go up even further. So remember, we're at 13,000. If I hit render now, okay, we're at 52,000. Okay, and we've got much better mapping. So it's pretty nice. However, yeah, very expensive. I don't really want to get into all the details of this. We can smooth it off. That just basically means that it's going to, in this case it's going to be a bit weird, but we're not going to have sharp ridges. It's going to be nice and smooth from one bump to the next. We can tell it which direction, so the normal to the surface. Okay, so in this case being a sphere, the normal to the surface is going to always be projected out from the surface. Okay, if it was a cube, be going out from the surface. So that's normally what we'd want. However, we could say like horizontal only, so now we won't get any bumps being protruded out on the top of our object, but we would out the sides. Don't know why you'd want to do that, but I'm sure one day. A normal map is actually kind of it's like as if there was a texture applied to our surface, and we haven't got one, and it kind of works like a bump map. Okay, so a bump map is kind of altering how the surface gets highlighted and shadows, and so it's as if this, the dark areas are pointing in one direction and the highlighted areas are pointing in another. Okay, so it's as if the normal direction on the surface was different. So we could actually import a normal map to alter what the surface looks like and how it reacts to light without actually changing the geometry. So yeah, some objects, like if it was perhaps a character, might have a normal map attached to it to sort of smooth off the surfaces, so you don't end up with these flat planes on their face. You want it all nice and smooth, and so they'd actually have a normal map and would actually dictate which direction the surface would be facing. It improves the rendering quality. We're not really going to get into normal maps, but that's what it is. Okay, let's turn off displacement mapping. So very cool, but use it with caution. You'll actually find that there are textures in there that are fantastic textures, but they've got the displacement mapping switched on, and it just destroys your rendering times. So you can load those textures in and just turn displacement mapping off, and then you get that cool texture without having to have the big overhead of displaced surfaces. Alright, highlights. Alright, let's just turn this bump map. Alright, we're just going to do a new material again. Alright, and we're just going to look at just the highlights. So the highlights, normally called a specular highlight, is how the light kind of reflects off the surface. So we're going to change this to be completely white. Okay, And you can see now we've got this sort of specular highlight, okay? It looks as if the light's hitting the surface. If we change this to bright, you'll see that, well, it's more intense. Change it to none, and there is no specular highlight. Okay. So maybe if the surface was absorbing the light a little bit, we'd have that closer to none. If it was very hard surface like glass or marble, something like that, might have a very bright highlight. The next one we've got is the highlight global size. So basically it's the size of this. So if it was a very hard surface like a marble, this would be very small. If it was like plastic, it's going to absorb a little bit and scatter around, and it's going to be quite spread out. Okay, so there's a plastic surface and there's a glass surface. Okay. If this was like a brushed metal or something like that, what happens is that usually, or silk, the shape of this kind of changes because of the brush marks on the surface. So we can change this from isotrophic to anisotrophic, and that's going to change this here a little bit. Okay, so it's quite good for materials, metals, things like that. Cool. Alright. We can have variable highlights as well. Basically what that means is that we could we'll just load a function into here, and the light's going to change across the surface. Okay, see, so we've kind of got as if well, at the moment it kind of looks like as if it was paint or something and the varnish is worn off. Yeah, we've got an intensity and a size controls for that as well, and we can scale this up and down. Cool. So yeah, quite good for if you had like an old metal, like an old painted metal, and you wanted to replicate as if like the varnish was kind of dissolved. Yeah, the gloss coat or something, the gel coat. Alright, again I'm just going to reset this. Now we're going to look at transparency. So transparency is exactly that. It's how transparent our object is. So if we set 100% transparent, we can't see it anymore. It's totally invisible. Okay, well, 100% opaque, it's zero transparency. Okay. Now, if you had something like glass, it's not just transparent. It's not like the light just goes straight through it. It gets bent, and that bending happens with the refraction index. Oh, sorry, there is also blurred transparency, which means that the transparency should end up blurred. I think it's probably something to do with the refractive index as well. So, yeah, and if we go, it's not very impressive, is it? The refraction index is how the light bends through it. Now, you could probably, it's a good question actually. If you search the net for the refractive index of different objects, you'll be able to pull them up. So, yeah, I think normally glass is about 1.1 or something like that. Okay, so it's bending the light as it goes through it. In fact, if we go and push this right the way up, so you're kind of getting up around the sort of diamond region, okay, you can see that the light's going through and it's refracting and coming out the other side. Go the other way, it was just a bit weird. It kind of ends up looking like as if it was a bubble. Okay, that's because a bubble, you have a high refractive index, and then the bubble of air has a low refractive index. Okay, and so that's why it ends up looking like a bubble. Alright. Flare is to do actually with light going in behind it. So if we go and I'll just close all these things for a second. Oh, it can stay there actually. So I'm just going to grab a little light bulb here and just move it right behind my object. Okay, so it's hitting the surface. I'll just move it off to one side a little bit. Okay, see that? So let's just go and edit this material again. So if we start playing around with this flare, if we go and change it to 0, we'll see that the light doesn't flare as it goes through the material. Kind of looks like it still is at the top there, but anyway. So if we change the span, you'll see that, well, nothing really happens. Again, we're kind of getting a little bit around there, because we need a little bit of intensity as well. Normally I'd have the span really low, sort of like about 5% at most. Okay, so you can see how it's kind of like as if the light's entering it, and the intensity is going to make that brighter or darker. Okay, so if it was a plastic, you'd expect it to do this quite significantly. If it was a really high quality glass lens, this would be as close to 0 as possible. Alright. That's looking quite nice. You'll see it kind of changes as the light moves around. So if I move it over to here, okay, you can kind of see how that kind of flaring out the plastic. Pretty cool, eh? Alright. Turn reflective with angle is exactly that. So if we go and change this to 100%, you'll see that our glass surface is now completely reflective. So this would be kind of like a, you get sometimes you get that effect with glass that you can get like a beautiful reflection and a certain angle that's completely transparent. So that's how you'd get that effect. Actually, I might just change my ground plane to be a checkerboard just so that you can kind of see what's going on a bit better. And I might just lift my camera up as well. Let's just roll this camera around a little bit. Okay, look down onto it. And we'll change this ground plane. Yeah. Let's load a material and make that the checkerboard. Cool. I might just scale it up a bit. Let's say 0.5. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so now I can actually see what's going on. Alright. And might also just drop a couple of little objects around here. Let's see, maybe a cube or something. Just so we've got something that will reflect the light. Alright, there we go. Kind of interesting, I suppose. Alright. Let's go back to this material. Okay, so if we increase this reflective, we'll start to see that the edges start to reflect the cubes. Alright. We've got a few other little funny things in here as well. Fuzzy, which you'll actually notice that when you switch that on, this fading out changes to a fuzzy control, and it's, I don't know why you would use it. I suppose maybe if you're trying to make something that was quite soft like wool or something, but you can kind of see how the edges completely, they kind of go transparent. Quite odd. But yeah, I suppose if it was something fluffy would be quite nice. Must admit I've never found a use for it. Additive. Hang on, how did it end up on that? I see, it's used the same slider. Additive, it will actually be completely transparent. It just adds the values. So this is quite good if you wanted to try and get kind of like a light streak or something. Like some light rays going through your scene, and you didn't want to do it with a light. You could actually just have a modelled object like a cone or something like that, put it through your scene and change this to additive. Okay, like a fog almost. Physical transparency is a very accurate glass texture, and it's got a few different ways of working. So you can have a little bit of a play around with this if you like, but this is what you should be using if you want to try and make a very accurate looking glass. Okay, we're going to increase our refractive index here a bit. There we go. And it's got all sorts of controls. You see that as I increase this, because now remember our sphere's 6 meters. So what I'm saying is that let's say if I said it was 4 meters, we should see the edges would be transparent, but the middle would start to not be transparent. like as if it was just too thick almost. There's a few different models in here. Fast ocean should only be used when you have an ocean and it's it looks pretty cool, especially if it's actually we'll just do it, especially if it's displaced ocean. So we go like this, right? Here's our ocean. Let's just move this out of the way. Drop our ground plane out there, down for a sec. And if we double click on the sea, right, we can say displaced water surface, which will definitely increase our render times, but that's alright. Okay. Here's our new ocean. Pop that underneath our scene. Alright, and we're going to go and edit this material. I'm going to change it to physical transparency, and we'll say fast ocean. We should get a pretty impressive looking water without actually changing too much. Alright, so there's our physical ocean. I think our sea needs to be a little bit more exciting, doesn't it? It looks a bit flat. Right. You'll actually find there's some certain materials that control the seawater much better. So if we go edit material, it's not really where I wanted to be going. That's alright. Let's just go in here. You'll see that under liquids should be our meta waters. These guys here are pretty cool. See, so here's this physical seawater, so that's one that's on there by default. Wavy shore, things like that. It should have some controls over it somewhere. Yeah, I'm kind of going off track anyway. I thought it did. Yeah, so here's the waves. And so this is actually controlled by it should be controlled. We're going to here. So I'm just going to unlock that. I don't know. Oh, here we go. If we turn that off, so this actually controls all of the variables inside that texture, which is pretty awesome. But anyway, completely off topic. Let's just go delete. Right. Delete. All right. Where's my sphere? Oh, my ground plane. See, the old camera's set to be always the same height above the ground, which is always confusing. Sphere, come on. Oh, there we go. Alright, where was I? Transparency. So, physical transparency is pretty cool, but you'd probably want it on either direct volumetric light, which that will apply all these transparency effects and only really uses the sunlight. If you have this set to indirect volumetric lighting, it will use the entire scene to dictate how this model works, so it will definitely cost you. Let's increase this. Okay, but it will look fantastic. Let's just reduce this. And deep transparency. Cool. This is to do with the way that the light scatters as it goes through. So the light that will be absorbed. So once the light goes through, what color will be left after the absorption? So let's say it was going to be this blue color. Okay, so we should get blue light kind of going through our glass, and the light that gets scattered off it is going to be, let's say, red. So as if it was going through. So we're going to get some highlights. Now look at that. Wow. And this kind of dictates where the light goes. If it's backwards, we'll see that there's more light kind of goes backwards through our scene. Where is our sun at the moment? Let's just move. Oh, that's right, because we've got this little spot, this little light as well, isn't it? Okay, so you can kind of see there's that blue, and it's quite different, the light coming through it. If we go the other way, we should see that there's more light going from the forward direction, so that's like this. Okay. So it's nice to play with. It just depends on how you want the light to scatter. Okay, so the quality boost is just going to make this whole effect look even better. It gets rid of a lot of the noise. Let's just do a good quality render so you can see what this looks like. Render to screen. We'll just go for that size for now. Okay, these weird patterns are due to the light bending as it passes through our sphere. So if it's too extreme, you just reduce your refractive index. Okay, so let's just go and drop that down a little bit. So it's 0.105. Alright. So now you can see that whole effect is reduced. Alright, let's turn physical transparency off. We've also got this clear murky thing, so you notice that when you switch this on and off it disappears. Fuzzy and physical kind of replace this. All this is going to do, if we go 100% murky, I don't know, let's work it off, but what it's applying this blue colour to the material, as if it was like murky water, if you like. If we were trying to make murky water, probably want like this kind of brown colour. Okay, and the light, let's say it was kind of this green colour. Okay, so you can see how the light goes through, and it's kind of going all murky, and we're getting kind of green light coming out the other end. And variable transparency, well, that's exactly the same as what we saw with the alpha. Okay, but it's well, it's going to be the transparency. Rather, the alpha is just, is it there, or is the material there or not there? This is going to basically tweak this number here, okay, but on the object surface itself. So again, we could just load in a function, load function. So let's say we did exactly the same thing we did last time, which was that one, wasn't it? Okay, so we've got kind of this transparent. What did we do? I think we went 0.1 by 0.1 or something like that. Okay, so now we've got this kind of object that has variable transparency in it, which just looks kind of peculiar. I don't know how you'd end up with an object like that. Maybe squares is a bit an odd thing to do. But anyway. Alright, let's reset our material again. And we're going to look at reflections. Pretty simple really. That's how reflective the object is. So if you're trying to make chrome, boom, there's your chrome. We can have blurred reflections, however, be careful because blurred reflections do cost at render time as well. So, but it looks, yeah, suitably fantastic. Okay, the rendering settings will dictate how good that blurring effect is. Normally have that set to 0. we also have variable reflections. So again, if we load a function into that, so let's say that one again, we'll get this patchiness. Okay, so I don't know, this kind of will end up looking like. All right. Anything else? Oh, user reflection. Now this user reflection, this is a kind of a way to cheat, if you like. If you wanted it to reflect an environment, what you can do is you can come in here. The Hydra ones are probably the best by a long shot because they're already spherical. And what it's going to do is it's going to reflect this image on our object. Okay, so it looks as if our object is in a totally different world. Okay, so it's reflecting a scene that isn't actually there. Alright. So, cool trick, but be careful how you use it because it might not make any sense whatsoever. Okay. Again, we're going to reset our texture and we're going to look at translucency. Now this one's a little bit tricky to sort of show off because it does a thing called subsurface scattering. What that means is the light is going to enter our object, scatter around inside and then come out again. In the same way that the light kind of goes into your skin. Some of it gets absorbed, some of it gets reflected back, and so your skin looks translucent. Alright, this first setting is actually how translucent, or how far the light is going to absorb into the surface. Okay, this might be a bit hard to actually try and illustrate on here. Let's just make this a little bit transparent. Okay. We can also have absorption, so that's how much the light's getting absorbed and how much of it's getting reflected back. We have a refractive index as well. So, oops, that was a bit weird. It's going to be very difficult to show, although we can kind of see it happening here. Let's just do a good quality render and see what happens. Okay, so the light's kind of getting absorbed into the surface. In this case, it would probably end up looking a little bit like marble. Okay, you know, with marble it's kind of semi-transparent. The light kind of absorbs in a bit and then kind of comes back out. And so, yeah, using a better rendering engine would probably help as well. So if we use like radiosity, we should get a really good effect. Alright, so you can have a bit of a play around with that. Again, this is how much the light kind of reflects, gets absorbed backwards or forwards. Return. Okay. It will have quite a subtle effect. Let's just change the color of this. Let's make it look a little bit more interesting. Okay, so now we can sort of see this absorption color. The scattering color, so let's make that blue. Maybe to sort of see how it's scattering some of this color. So if we go backwards, we should see it going quite blue. If we go forward, oh sorry, other way around. Go forward, so the light's scattering back towards us in this case. Backwards. Now we're getting an interesting looking effect, aren't we? Let's just increase the refractive index a little bit. Okay, let's hit render on that. this is quite slow. As you can imagine, it's trying to fire light rays into the surface and then bouncing them around and spitting them back out again. So it can become quite complex. Okay, but we're getting some really interesting sort of effects. It would look more interesting if we had... Have we still got our backlight in there? Ah, it's not behind it though, is it? So it's right behind it. Let's say over there. Move that off to the edge a bit. Okay, so that light's kind of coming through. And let's just turn this transparency right down. Okay, so we're only seeing the effect. Not very convincing. How about if we grab our sunlight? It should be sitting around here somewhere. Here it is. We'll move our sun in behind it. I'm going to have to make that much deeper. Ooh, yeah, there we go. So render on that. Okay, so this is being illuminated now because the light's kind of going through it. Looks like we still need to be tweaking it a lot. Also, the fact that it's such a simple object isn't really doing us any favors. If we change this object to something a little bit more interesting, we get a much bigger effect. So if it's like, you know, an ear or something like that. Alright, use infinitely thin surface model. Sounds interesting, doesn't it? Okay, we'll leave that. So let's just go new. We'll play around perhaps with some textures over the next few weeks as well. We should probably share them. Okay, now just diving into the effects. Now this diffuse and ambient, you shouldn't really change these. These should be done in your lighting effects, but you can kind of override it. So it's just going to dictate. So let's just move my sun back into a normal kind of position. Okay. So if I go and make the ambient 0, we should end up having a much darker shadow in here. Okay, so I think by default it's 40. Okay, go the other way, the whole thing should end up a much lighter. But yeah, I would not change this in here, I'd change it in my lighting settings. Okay, that's an interesting override. Luminous makes it look as if the object is illuminated, however it will only do it.
Oh, I'll come back.
Luminous will only work if your rendering setting is set to radiosity, if you actually want this to be luminous, otherwise it will just appear as if it was luminous. Okay, so change this to, oops, not that, sorry, left click, and we change the light to radiosity. Okay, I might just actually just drop my sun down. It's not even in the scene anymore. So now my object is actually illuminating my entire scene, and you'll see how rendering times go. Okay, so it's actually illuminating my entire scene. Very cool. Yes. All right. You can use that with a little bit of, where is it? Glow. So you do this glowing material, and so it's actually a post effect where it will kind of give the illusion that it's glowing, like as if the atmosphere around it is glowing. And we also have a couple other little things in here. Let's say, I'm just going to reset this entire material again. Let's say we had some reflections going on, right? Now you'll notice if I change the color of this, let's say I make it red. Okay, come on, go red. I'll change this to 100% reflective. The red has no effect on it. However, if we go to our effects, it's got this colored reflected light. That's going to multiply the color of the object with this, and it will actually look as if it's red. Oh, sorry, my light was in the scene before. It was kind of illuminating my scene as well. See, so now it's got like a red reflection to it. Where's my sun? There we go. See, red. Lovely. And we've also got color of the transmitted light. So I'll just reset this texture yet again. So if we've got transparency, okay, and our object is red, more or less. We can see the light going through it now has much more of the color has a much more bigger effect on the translucency. Okay, so it looks much more redder. Backlight will actually have an effect. Actually, we'll just reset this yet again and increase the backlight. It's kind of an illusion that we should get if our maybe we just need to be a little bit transparent. We should see as if the light behind it is going through, so kind of like a leaf. If the sun shines through a leaf, the leaf isn't transparent, but you can see the light kind of illuminating in behind it, and so we can get that effect as well. Okay, so you can kind of see how the light is behind it. This would be quite good if you're trying to make like a green leaf or something. Is there anything else in here we want to look at? Actually, we'll just I talked about glow. You can play around with the settings. You can see that it makes it big glow or small glow, etc., etc. Turbulence will just mess up our texture a bit, so let's just load in the good old checkerboard. Okay, so we can add turbulence. Sometimes it's not so obvious, but you can kind of see in here how it's kind of making the whole thing distorted. So it's quite good if you've got a texture and you just want to break it up a little bit and it's looking very repetitive. You can just come in here and just add some turbulence. We can also rotate it. So this will rotate it in the X, the Y, and the Z. And cycling does a similar sort of thing again. You can kind of see it's just sort of distorting and warping our texture. So again, it's quite good for removing sort of the repetitiveness of a texture. Okay, so that was the basics on materials. What I want you to do now is go and make your own materials up, so maybe a glass, a stone, rock, concrete, things like that, just using the techniques that you've learnt today. And we're also going to do another session in the future on advanced textures and texture placements. We'll be looking at ecosystems and how we can place different materials and ecosystems onto our terrains mainly, based on environmental factors like aspect, slope and height. We can also use other fractal images to place them and layer them up. So we're going to be doing that probably in a couple of weeks' time. Next week, however, we're going to be working with hyperblobs and metablobs and other techniques to model things within View itself, especially rocks and rock formations. So until then, have a bit of fun, and any questions, post them below, and I look forward to seeing your blogs being updated with some awesome materials. Till then, see ya.